My name is Jane Rhodes. I'm a logistics officer in the U.S. Army, currently holding the rank of captain, which basically means I help make sure people and supplies get to where they need to be, when they need to be there. It's not glamorous, and it's definitely not what most people picture when they think of military service, but it's the kind of job that keeps everything else running. I've spent the last 15 years doing that job across multiple continents, often under tight deadlines, with high stakes and little room for error. And in all that time, the hardest part hasn't been the pressure or the long hours or even the deployments. It's been coming home and realizing that, to my family, I might as well be invisible. I'm the youngest of three, the only girl and the only one who didn't follow a normal path. My brother Brian owns a string of luxury car dealerships. He wears $1,000 suits and flies first class and has a way of making every conversation feel like a sales pitch. My parents talk about him like he invented business itself. At every family dinner, Brian's stories dominate the table. Latest acquisition, some influencer partnership, or the new villa he and his wife are renovating. When it's my turn, someone inevitably asks, "So where are you stationed now?" In the same tone you'd ask a stranger at the DMV how long the line's been. It's not that they're unkind, they just don't know what to do with me. I don't wear my rank on my sleeve at home. I don't lead with stories about coordinating supply chains in conflict zones or negotiating fuel contracts with foreign governments. And so, they treat me like the quiet one who never quite figured things out. Brian, especially. He never misses a chance to remind me how much money I could be making in the private sector. Logistics, but for real companies, as he puts it. "You'd be pulling 6 figures easy," he said once, while sipping wine that probably cost more than my monthly rent. And I've gotten used to it. Mostly. You learn to smile, to nod, to let them believe what they want to believe. It's easier that way. It keeps the peace. But things changed recently when Brian announced he was treating the whole family to a week-long getaway at a luxury resort in Florida. His treat: private beach, full-service villa, all expenses covered. He wanted to celebrate his wife's birthday and, of course, remind us all of how well he's doing. I went. Not because I needed a vacation, but because, deep down, I think I wanted to see what would happen if I stopped being invisible. My job isn't the kind of thing that shows up in movies. There are no explosions, no dramatic rescues, no theme music playing in the background. What I do is make sure that when a battalion lands in a foreign country, everything they need is already there waiting for them. That means fuel, food, water, medical supplies, vehicles, shelter, and sometimes even power and internet. It means working months in advance, negotiating access to foreign ports, arranging transport routes across 3 or 4 countries, and coordinating dozens of vendors and contractors. But more than that, logistics is about relationships. It's about knowing the Port Authority director in Singapore by his first name. It's about having the personal cell number of the CEO of a global shipping conglomerate because you helped his team navigate a blockade 3 years ago. It's about favors. In my world, money is cheap. Access is the only currency that matters. I've overseen logistics operations supporting combat units, humanitarian missions, and multinational training exercises. Some of those operations involved moving assets worth more than my brother's entire business portfolio. But none of that fits into a simple sentence when someone at a family party asks, "So what do you do in the military?" If I say, "logistics," they nod as if they understand, then ask if I drive trucks. Once at Thanksgiving, my aunt asked if I wore a uniform while doing office work. To be fair, my job is invisible by design. When I do it right, no one notices. Things just arrive. Plans work, people eat, missions succeed. But that invisibility also means that my family sees me as someone who never quite made it. I don't blame them. Not really. It's hard to grasp the scale of military logistics unless you've lived it. They think success means money and Instagram-worthy vacations, not making a call that reroutes a freighter halfway across the world in 24 hours. So I let them think what they want. I nod. I smile. I ask about their renovations and new cars. But inside, I know the scope of what I carry. I know what I've made happen. I know what I'm worth, even if they never will. There's a strange kind of freedom in being underestimated. When people assume you're unremarkable, they stop watching you so closely. They stop questioning your choices, your motives, your movements. Over time, I found a kind of peace in that invisibility. It gave me space to grow, to lead, to build a career on my own terms without the constant noise of comparison. I could make bold decisions, pull off complex missions, and take pride in the fact that no one outside my work circle even knew what I'd done. There was power in that. Quiet, steady power that didn't need approval to exist. Letting my family believe I was just the military one became a kind of armor. They saw Brian as the star, the provider, the achiever. And that was fine with me. He needed the attention more than I ever did. Sometimes I wondered what would happen if I pulled back the curtain. If I laid out the truth, connection by connection, accomplishment by accomplishment. But then I'd remind myself that real influence doesn't require validation. It's not something you flash around at dinner parties. The more they talked, the less I needed to say. And that silence became a kind of strength. I learned to listen, to watch, to gather leverage without ever raising my voice. Because at the end of the day, I knew I didn't need them to see me to be significant. I didn't need applause to know my worth. What I had couldn't be measured by income or Instagram. It ran deeper. And when the time came, I knew exactly how to show them, without ever having to say, "I told you so." We got to the beach mid-morning. The sun was already high, the water impossibly blue, and the private trail leading down from the villa opened to a stretch of sand so clean it looked staged. Brian had discovered it through the resort concierge, of course, and made sure we all knew it was off limits to regular guests. There was a small equipment shed near the entrance, manned by a bored-looking teenager renting out beach chairs and umbrellas. Brian walked right up and asked how many chairs he had available. The kid shrugged and said maybe 8, tops. Brian did a quick count, then smiled that calculated smile he always wore when he saw a way to work a room. "We'll take all 8, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. And just like that, he claimed the best of what the beach had to offer. He set them up in a neat semicircle facing the water, positioning the newest chairs under the widest umbrellas. 1 for him, 1 for his wife, 2 for my parents, and the rest for the teenagers. When I walked over, there were 2 chairs left. One was sun-faded with ripped canvas. The other had a broken leg that sank slightly in the sand. Brian looked at me like it was all perfectly reasonable. "Sorry, Jane," he said, gesturing toward the leftover chairs near the equipment shed. "There weren't enough good ones. You don't mind, do you?" His voice was light, teasing, but his eyes were watching me, waiting for something. Blanca laughed, already laying out her designer towel. My parents didn't say a word. They were settling into their seats like everything was fine. Even the teenagers looked awkward, but no one moved. I looked at the torn chair, then at the perfect row lined up by the water, then back at Brian. He was smirking now, proud of his little arrangement. I smiled, just a small, polite smile. "This is fine," I said, and sat down on the tilted frame. He blinked, like he hadn't expected me to accept it so easily. "We'll be down there if you need anything," he said, already turning away. The rest of them walked off, laughing, stretching, sunscreening each other, like I wasn't even there. I sat quietly, watching the waves roll in. The breeze was nice, even back by the shed. But underneath all that calm, something had shifted. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even hurt. Not really. It was something colder, quieter, like a line had been crossed. And now it was time to remind them who I really was. I knew who owned this resort. Not the corporation listed on the brochure, the majority shareholder, a man named Julian Vance. 3 years ago, I helped coordinate the rapid medical evacuation of his daughter from a destabilized region in North Africa when commercial flights were grounded. He had told me then, "Anytime, anywhere. You call me." I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and dialed the personal number I hadn't used in years. It rang twice. "Captain Rhodes," a familiar, deep voice answered. "To what do I owe the honor?" "Hello, Mr. Vance," I said, keeping my voice low. "I'm actually currently a guest at your property in Florida, the Solstice Cove." "You are?" His tone brightened immediately. "Why didn't you tell me? I would have had the jet pick you up." "I'm here with family," I said, trying to keep a low profile, but we're having a bit of a situation with the beach amenities. It seems my brother booked the last of the good chairs." Vance laughed, a rich, knowing laugh. "Say no more, Jane. Give me 10 minutes. Where are you sitting?" "By the equipment shed. The broken chair." "Unacceptable," he said. "Sit tight. And Jane, it's on the house. All of it." I thanked him and hung up. No one around me had noticed. Brian and Blanca were stretched out under their umbrella, oblivious and smug. That was the thing about real power. It doesn't need to shout. It just needs to know who to call. I leaned back in the creaky chair, adjusted the shade to block the sun from my eyes, and waited. Not with tension. Not with anger. But with certainty. About 12 minutes later, the sound of a motor cut through the sound of the surf. It wasn't a helicopter. It was a pristine 40-foot tender boat, gleaming white and mahogany, cutting through the water from the direction of the main marina. It bore the resort's crest in gold leaf. Brian sat up, shading his eyes. "Whoa, look at that thing. Wonder who that's for." The boat slowed, engines purring, and gently beached itself on the sand about 20 yards away from us. A ramp is extended. 3 staff members walked down. But these weren't the college kids working the shed. These were men in crisp white linens and blazers. The general manager of the resort, a man Brian had been trying to get a meeting with all week to discuss a corporate contract, was leading them. They ignored Brian completely. They walked right past his little setup. They walked straight to the shed. Straight to me. The general manager stopped in front of my broken chair and bowed slightly. "Captain Rhodes," he said, loud enough for the wind to carry his voice. "Mr. Vance sends his deepest apologies for the accommodations. He insists we rectify this immediately." I stood up, brushing the sand from my legs. "Thank you, Charles. It's good to see you." At a snap of his fingers, the staff moved. They didn't just bring a chair. They set up a cabana, a portable, teak-framed structure with billowing white curtains was assembled in minutes. Plush lounge furniture was brought out. A low table was set with crystal glasses, a bucket of ice, and a bottle of wine that I knew wasn't on the resort's public menu. Then the chef stepped off the boat. He carried a silver platter, fresh stone crab, and caviar. Down the beach, I could feel the silence. Brian was standing now, mouth slightly open, sunglasses in hand. Blanca wasn't speaking. My parents had frozen mid-page in their books. I sat down on the plush sofa inside my new cabana. The GM poured the wine. Mr. Vance also wanted you to know that the master suite in the main villa has been unlocked for you, should you wish to move from your current room. Thank you, I said. I might take him up on that. Brian walked up slowly. His sandals kicked up little puffs of sand, but his face was all tension. He stopped just at the edge of the cabana, looking at the GM, then at me. Charles? Brian asked, his voice high. I've been leaving messages for you all week. I'm Brian Rhodes. We have that proposal regarding the fleet vehicles. The GM looked at Brian with polite disinterest. My apologies, Mr. Rhodes. My schedule is fully committed to our priority guests. He turned his back on Brian and looked at me. Is there anything else you require, Captain? No, Charles. This is perfect. The staff retreated to the boat. The GM nodded and followed them. The boat reversed and sped away, leaving me in luxury that made Brian's rental chairs look like driftwood. Brian stared at me. You know the owner? I took a sip of the wine. It was excellent. I do? How? Brian demanded. How does an Army logistics officer know Julian Vance? That guy is a billionaire. He doesn't talk to anyone. I looked at him over the rim of my glass. Logistics isn't just about moving boxes, Brian. It's about moving people. When you move the right people out of the wrong places, they tend to remember you. He blinked. What does that mean? It means I spent a night coordinating an extraction for his family 3 years ago, while you were sleeping, I said calmly. I didn't charge him for it. That's the difference between business and service. Brian looked at the wine, then at the cabana, then back at his own setup. He looked at the master of the universe he thought he was, and realized he was just a tourist. You could have told us, he muttered. I tried, I said. You asked if I drove a truck. I leaned forward, meeting his eyes for the first time all day. You've spent this whole trip showing me what money looks like. The house, the first-class tickets, the curated life. I paused, not for effect, just because the truth needed space to land. Then I said it, calm and clear. I thought I'd show you what influence looks like. The rest of the afternoon passed in a kind of quiet I hadn't felt in years. No more jabs, no passive-aggressive comments. Brian didn't come back to ask for a glass of wine. He sat under his umbrella, staring out at the water. My mom glanced at me a few times, her mouth open like she wanted to ask something but didn't know where to begin. Even my dad didn't try to fill the space. He just nodded at me once, like maybe, for the first time, he saw me, not fully, but something. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no internal fist pump. What I felt instead was release. Like I'd been holding a breath for 15 years and had finally let it go. I realized I hadn't needed them to understand what I did. I just needed them to stop acting like it didn't matter. And now they knew. Money can buy a beach chair, but it can't buy the respect of the people who own the beach. That night, dinner was quiet. No one talked about business. Brian barely touched his food. Later, as we packed to leave, my father walked over and said softly, "We didn't know you knew people like that." I looked at him. I know a lot of people, Dad. Most of them don't have villas, but they're all important. He hesitated. I guess we underestimated you. I smiled. I know. It's okay. It made me better at my job. The next morning, a private car sent by Mr. Vance arrived to take me to the airport. Not a limo, a secure, armored SUV. As I climbed in, I looked back at the resort. The setup was gone. So was the need to prove myself. I didn't need revenge. I didn't want applause. What I wanted, what I got, was clarity. I was never small. I was never less. I was connected. They just couldn't see past their own definition of value to notice. And now it didn't matter if they ever did. I had the wine, I had the view, and I had the truth. That was enough.